Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is for all you readers out there that want to get into fantasy but don't know how. So lucky for you, I am here as your guide and I'm gonna give you guys all of my favorite fantasy book recs for beginners. So when I first started my reading journey back in 2021, I think, I was a strictly only romance reader. That was the only genre I read, just because that's what got me into reading. So I was really scared to branch out and try something different. But over time, after being an active member in the book community and like scrolling through Booksta and Book Talk and BookTube, I really got FOMO when it came to my fantasy and romantasy girlies. I was like, I'm missing out on all these great books, and like, for why? Just because I'm scared of reading fantasy books. And so last summer I really got into my fantasy era, and during that time I really relied on videos like these to help me find recs and to discover what I like and dislike in a fantasy book. And so I have decided to return the favor and make a video of my own to help you guys figure out what kind of fantasy books you should be reading as a beginner fantasy reader. So we are starting off this video with all the young adult book recs. I just feel like YA fantasy is a great starting point for beginner fantasy readers, just because the magic system and world building is a little bit easier to understand because it's meant for a younger demographic. However, that isn't to say that this is a dumbed down version of an adult fantasy and that adult fantasies are the best fantasies out there. Sometimes I like YA fantasies more than I like the adult fantasy books. So the first book rec of this video is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. This is actually the first book of the series, so there are two more following this one. But essentially, the series is about two sisters, Donatella and Scarlet. And growing up, they've heard about stories about Caraval and the mysterious figurehead that creates these games. And Caraval, in a nutshell, is like a traveling circus. It doesn't go to one location twice. And I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of games and there's a competition, and if you win a prize. But the games are very mystical and magical, so you're constantly guessing what is real, what is not real, things like that. But the game of Caraval ends up coming to Donatella and Scarlet's island where they live, and Scarlet has no desire to enter the game. She kind of sees it as a bunch of fairy tales and children's stories. She just doesn't believe in it. She kind of thinks it's dangerous and reckless in a way. But Donatella is very enamored by this idea, and she decides to enter the game despite Scarlet's warnings, and Scarlet, being the older responsible sister, follows Donatella to make sure that she is safe. This is like a 5-star series for me. I love it. I'm not the type of reader where I can like imagine the book that I'm reading like a movie, but this book, and honestly the rest of the books in the series, just like played out like a movie for me. That's how good it was. I literally binged the entire series in like a week. I am like begging, pleading with someone to make this series into a TV show because I think it would just do so well. I don't know. I just love the characters. I love the premise. I love that it has so many twists and turns in the magical setting. Highly recommend. So the next book rec is also by Stephanie Garber, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart. This is also a trilogy, and it actually takes place in the same universe as Caraval. So some of the characters from Caraval do appear in Once Upon a Broken Heart. I will say, if you want to read the series in a chronological order, you need to read the Caraval trilogy before reading this trilogy, just because you do get something spoiled if you read this one first. However, if you have no interest in reading Caraval, but this book really interests you, you'll still be able to fully understand this trilogy. Like, you don't have to read them all. However, as someone who has read them all, I highly recommend you read them all. So essentially, this book is about Evangeline Fox, and her true love is about to marry her sister. And she doesn't really get along with her stepmother or her sister, so she just feels like something bad is going on. Like, her true love would never do this to her, would never betray her like this. So she figures that someone has put him under a spell, and so in order to stop the wedding, she goes to the Prince of Hearts and pleads with him plan to stop the wedding and save her true love. And basically, in return for stopping the wedding, Evangeline agrees to give the Prince of Hearts 3 kisses, and let's just say Evangeline is very worried about what these 3 kisses mean for her. I just love Stephanie Garber. I feel like that is so evident from the last clip and also this one. She is probably one of my favorite YA authors ever. I just love everything she writes. I feel like Once Upon a Broken Heart is a little bit more of a fairy tale-like fantasy. It takes place in this magical kingdom. There's princes, there's balls, there's fun dresses and carriage rides, and I just ate it up. I love it. I also really liked that Evangeline is a little bit more of a softer, more feminine fantasy character. Even though I love my badass fantasy girlies, like, do not get me wrong, I eat that up. It is so nice to kind of have those fantasy characters that are a little bit on the more softer side. I definitely see myself more in those kind of characters than I do the ones like wielding a sword and killing all these people. Just because that's not who I am. I don't think I could ever fight in combat. But I definitely see myself in someone like Evangeline, who's a little bit more of an optimist and just really cares about what is right and her loved ones and things like that. My favorite book out of the series is definitely the second one. I think that book just like makes the series. It is like a 6-star read for me. That is how good it is. Like, it goes beyond the 1 through 5 scale. Even if Caraval is not up your alley, please give this series a try. So moving on to the next book rack, we have Lightlark by Alex Astor. This is also the first book of a trilogy, and it's actually now complete. The last book of the trilogy just came out in November, so it is literally the perfect time to pick up this series if you haven't already. So Lightlark is about this competition that happens like every 100 years on this island, and basically the people who come to compete on this island are the rulers of these 6 realms, and each realm has different powers, but something really traumatic happened like thousands and thousands of years ago, and a curse befell all of them, and each curse is a little bit different to kind of match what power they have. So for instance, our main male character, Isla, her powers are very connected to the earth and like nature, but her curse is that her people can only eat the hearts of others and they can never fall in love. So basically the competition of Lightlark is the ruler's opportunity to break the curse. However, it is a very high stakes situation because in order to win Lightlark, one ruler must be killed. And if the ruler of a kingdom is killed and there is no heir, that entire population is wiped out. So it's very intense, okay? I love this series. I read Lightlark earlier this year and it was a 5-star read for me. I absolutely ate it up. I love a good high stakes competition. I feel like it speaks to the 13-year-old girl in me that like was obsessed with Hunger Games. This book is also one of the only series that like really does a love triangle justice. I feel like with love triangles, there's always a clear favorite from the author, but this book, I literally can't tell. Like, who's the favorite? Where? I don't know. Obviously, I have a favorite because I like picking favorites, but I honestly wouldn't be mad if she ended up with the other person. I haven't read the third one yet, but I am like itching to. It's on my 10 before the end TBR, so it will probably make its appearance in a video sometime soon. But yeah, Lightlark, it's an amazing series. I love the high stakes competition. I loved the world building, the romance, everything. So the next book of this video is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This is technically the first book in a trilogy, but the series is not finished yet. The third book comes out in November 2025, and I literally cannot wait. I am counting down the days until that book is released because I love this series. But Powerless is essentially about Peyton, and she lives in this kingdom where it is essentially illegal to not have powers. If you aren't born with powers, you can either get exiled or executed, and Peyton does not have powers. She is a thief living on the streets, and she is constantly having to figure out how to outsmart everyone and kind of convince them that she has powers through the power of observation, and it's honestly really interesting to read about. But in her kingdom, there is this tradition of these games that are hosted, and it's essentially just an opportunity for the elites, which is what they call the people that have like the really good powers, to show off their abilities and to kind of gain status and prestige. and the prize at the competition is a bunch of money, so there is kind of an incentive for the common folk of the kingdom, I guess. But Peyton ends up being nominated to be a contestant in this competition, and that's basically what you're reading about for the entire book. I loved this book. I love a high stakes competition. I feel like that's really evident with how much I loved Lightlark as well. But this book just really reminded me of Hunger Games because there's like sponsors, there's balls, there's kind of like a not great government going on, things like that. There's also a really good enemies to lovers subplot, and one thing that I need to tell you romance girlies is that enemies to lovers in fantasy books is so much better than enemies to lovers in romance books. It just hits so different. It's so good. It's so much more intense. The banter is amazing. I absolutely love this book. I feel like it is so good, and I feel like the world building and the magic system is very easy to grasp, so very beginner friendly. If you need a lot of romance, I think this book does have a lot of romance and a lot of banter, so yeah. So the last YA book rec of this video is Divine Rivals. This is actually only a duology, so there's only one other book, so this is great if you're looking for kind of a lower commitment read. Sometimes you don't want to start a full-on series, and that's totally okay. But Divine Rivals is about Iris and Roman, and they both work for the same newspaper company, and they're kind of workplace rivals. They're constantly competing with each other for promotions, stories, leads, things like that, and because of that, they kind of develop this animosity towards one another. However, they're both in possession of these magical typewriters, and if one person writes a letter from their typewriter, it is magically transported to the other person, and because of that, they kind of become anonymous pen pals and kind of develop a friendship that they don't even know about. So you kind of have this fun premise of workplace rivals, but like, you guys are actually friends, you just don't know that yet. And I ate that up. The fantasy elements of the book is definitely through the magical typewriters, but also the setting. It takes place during this war between two gods, and you kind of get some background information about the gods throughout this book. But also the world that they're in is also very magical in a way. It kind of reminds me of like 19th century London, but like add magic. There's like this magical convenience store, the magical typewriters, things like that, but then you have like normal things going on like a newspaper. To me, it kind of reads like a historical fantasy and kind of has aspects of magical realism. I know some people really hate on the world building in Divine Rivals. They don't quite understand it and it didn't make sense, but I love it. I kind of like going into fantasy books purely for vibes, and this book is definitely a vibe. I absolutely loved the romance in the book and the characters. I think the character building from Rebecca Ross and like the letters and that kind of stuff really shines in this book, and that's why I rated it so highly. So if you're kind of wanting more of a romantasy, I think you should definitely pick up this book. I apologize for the drastic change of lighting in this video. I literally went from it being like daytime to night in the span of like 15 minutes because the sun likes to go down at like 5 o'clock where I live. So moving on to the adult fantasy recs, we have Kingdom of the Wicked by maniscalco. Technically, this book is YA, but the next two in the trilogy are not. I think they're technically categorized as new adult, so there are some spice scenes. So just to kind of capture an accurate picture of what these books are, I ended up putting them in the adult fantasy section of this video just because some people read YA because they don't want any spice, and I feel like these books are just a little too spicy to be in the YA section. So basically, this book is about two twin sisters, Amelia and Victoria, and they are witches. They kind of live in this 1800s town in like Italy, I feel like. At least it felt like Italy. But growing up, they've always been warned against the princes of hell and like demons and devils and things like that. They've just been told to never make a deal with one, stay away from them, things like that. However, one day Victoria is mysteriously murdered, and in order to kind of figure out what happened to her sister, Amelia decides to summon one of the princes of hell and make a deal with him to help her solve the murder of her sister. I loved this book. Kingdom of the Wicked is actually the series that got me into fantasy. It was amazing. I literally remember starting this book before I had to go to work, and when I had to go, I was like so devastated. I literally sat in the back of the store and folded clothes and just like thought about this book my entire shift. I could not get this book off my mind. I absolutely loved the fantasy aspect of like witches and devils. I feel like because the magic system in the world building is about witches and devils and demons, it's a little bit easier to understand because that's stuff that we're used to in like movies and TV shows. I also really loved the mystery aspect of the book. I really enjoyed them like finding clues, trying to discover what's going on. This series definitely has a lot of twists and turns, and I just ate it up. If you need a lot of romance, plot, action, this is definitely the series for you. I just ate it up. It is just pure vibes, and if that's what you want, this is fantastic for you. This is the perfect choice for you, okay? So the next book of this video is a tried and true to the book community. I'm gonna feel like a broken record after recommending this, but I don't care. I feel like it is a must. I need to include it in this video. It would be a crime not to. And that is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. So this book is technically YA, but the rest of the series are not, hence why it is in the adult section of this video. But the first book of the series kind of follows a Beauty and the Beast retelling. The main character, Farah, is a human girl, and her family have kind of hit hard times. She is kind of forced at a young age to go and learn how to hunt to provide for her family, and one day while hunting she ends up killing an animal that wasn't really an animal, and as a consequence she is forced to go live in the Fae realms away from her family. And it is there that she learns that the Fae are kind of going through a hard time as well. They have been overrun by this very scary woman, and basically all the Fae people are kind of dwindled on their magic. They're not as powerful anymore, things like that. This series is amazing. I absolutely loved it. I will give a warning, however, this book is a little bit hard to get into. I listened to it on audio and then just followed along, and I think it helps tremendously. I feel like the books that really shine in this book is the second one and the last one. Those are really like the community favorites, I feel like. It is still not a finished series. I think there's still like 1 or 2 books left, and I have no clue when they're supposed to be out. I think the next one was supposed to come out in 2025, but it might have been pushed back. I don't know. I feel like reading this series is a must in the book community. Like, you have to read it. Like, please, come on. We all have to talk about it. Some tropes in this book that might help you get into it is that there is a large found family aspect to the entire series. I feel like this series is definitely a little bit more beginner friendly than Sarah J. Maas's other series, just because it has the biggest romance subplot. Like, these are basically romance books. So yeah, please read this series. It is so good. My favorite book is the last one so far, A Court of Silver Flames. Like, it just really made this series for me. But honestly, every single book of the series has a special place in my heart. So the next 2 books of this video are a little bit more on the intermediate side of fantasy. I feel like you can still read them as a beginner, but they can't be your introduction to fantasy. I feel like you should read at least like a few fantasy books before entering these, just because the world building and magic system is a little bit more complex. But the first book we have is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. The premise is a little bit confusing, so I'm just gonna read the back of the book, but this is essentially a gothic fantasy about our main character, Elspeth Spindle. On the back of the book, it says, Elspeth Spindle needs more than luck to stay safe in the eerie mist-locked kingdom of Blunder. She needs a monster. She calls him the Nightmare, an ancient spirit trapped in her head. He protects her, he keeps her secrets, but nothing comes for free, especially magic. When Elspeth meets a mysterious highwayman on the forest road, her life takes a drastic turn. Thrust into the world of shadow and deception, she joins a dangerous quest to cure Blunder of the dark magic infecting it. Except the highwayman just so happens to be the king's own nephew, captain of the most dangerous men in Blunder, and guilty of treason. I loved this book. This was a 5-star read for me. I also love that it's a duology, so it's only 2 books. Again, another low stakes fantasy. We love that. The magic system is so unique. That's like what really pulled me to the book. Basically, the magic system comprises of these deck of cards, and each card grants you a magic power, but there's a trade-off. So for example, there's this card that grants you like undeniable beauty. It will literally make you the most beautiful person alive. but a trade-off is that you no longer have your compassion or empathy, so you basically become a very stone cold person, like a robot essentially. I just really love the emphasis of magic has a price. I really liked the quest of curing the kingdom from this like curse that they're under. There's definitely a huge found family trope in this book, which I eat up. I love the found family trope. That's one of my favorite tropes ever. The romance is there, like, do not get me wrong, but I feel like the world building, magic system, and the overall plot is kind of what drives this book. The romance is fun, it's good, don't worry, but I don't think it's at the forefront of this book. So the last book of this video is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is technically part of the Crowns of Nyxia series, which I think is going to be a 6-book series, but you could read this as a duology. There's gonna be trade-offs to different main characters and couples or whatever, so each couple gets 2 books, I'm pretty sure, and it kind of explores different aspects of the world that Carissa Broadbent has built on these books. But The Serpent and the Wings of Night is technically a duology, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You only have to read 2 books to finish the complete story. So this book is about Aurea, and she is the human adoptive daughter of this vampire king. And in this world, there's this big competition that happens every few years, I think. And all these vampires are put into this like castle, essentially, and you have to do all these challenges and fight each other, and whoever wins gets to be granted a wish from their goddess. And so growing up, Aurea has always known that she is less than. Humans are kind of like a second-rate species in this world. Vampires are just kind of seen as this superior being. So because of this, she has been prepping for this competition for her entire life. She needs to win so she become a vampire like her dad. And it's essentially, in a nutshell, vampire Hunger Games, and I love it. It also has this romance subplot of enemies to allies to lovers, and I ate that up. There's just so much action in this book, and I love it. Again, if you like a high stakes competition like myself, this is the book for you. The only reason why I say this is not a beginner friendly book, it's a little bit more intermediate, is because the world building and the political system in this series is a very well thought out, and there's just a lot of different characters, names, places, background information, just a lot going on. And even though Carissa Broadbent does include a glossary that explains everything, which I found super helpful when I read this book, I do think if you're a beginner, this should not be your first dive into fantasy. Again, I feel like you should read this a little bit later on in your fantasy journey, but it's definitely still worth a read. So that is it for my fantasy book rec video. I hope you enjoyed. I again apologize for the drastic change of lighting throughout this video. I live in the Midwest, so it literally gets dark at like 5 p.m. But nonetheless, if you liked this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below if you've read any of these books, or if you're wanting to read any of these books, or if you have any fantasy book recs that you want to share. I would love to know. But yeah, make sure to subscribe for more videos. I have a lot of fun things planned. I'm kind of getting to the end of my semester at school, so expect a lot more videos from me. But yeah, I will see you next time. Goodbye.